My daughter-in-law handed me a list. It was printed on actual paper, which should have been my first clue that something was wrong. She never prints anything. She does everything on her phone, sends links, screenshots, voice memos. But this was paper folded once, slid across the kitchen counter while my son stood by the refrigerator, pretending to read the label on a juice bottle. "We figured this would be easier," she said. It was a list of things she needed me to do while they were in Japan. Water the orchids every 3 days, not 2. Take in the packages. Don't let the mail pile up. Feed the cat in the morning and at 8 at night, exactly 8, because he gets anxious. The cleaning service would come on Thursday, so I should be there to let them in. Oh, and my grandson had a dentist appointment on the 14th. Could I handle that too? His insurance card was in the blue folder in the 3rd drawer. I read the whole thing standing at their kitchen counter. Then I looked up. "When do you leave?" "Sunday," my son said, still not looking at me. "Early. And when did you plan to tell me you weren't taking me?" His wife cleared her throat. "We talked about it, and honestly, Mom, the itinerary is really packed. Lots of walking, long days. We didn't want you to feel like you had to keep up." Keep up? I was 69 years old. I walked 2 miles every morning before they were awake. I'd carried 3 children through 2 miscarriages and 1 husband through the last year of his life. But sure, I might not keep up. I folded the list, tucked it into my pocket, said I'd be there Sunday to wave them off. And I was. I stood on their driveway in the early cold and watched my son load 4 matching suitcases into the back of the car. My granddaughter, Penny, 14 and earphone deep in whatever teenagers disappear into, paused long enough to hug me around the middle. My grandson, 8 and all elbows, told me he'd bring me back a samurai thing. I said I'd love that. My daughter-in-law hugged me last, quickly, the kind of hug that's really just a formality wearing the costume of affection. "We'll send pictures," she said. "I know you will," I said. I drove home, made coffee, sat at the table where my husband Frank used to read the paper every Sunday morning, and I looked at the empty chair across from me for a long time. Then I went to the drawer where I keep my passport. It was valid. Good through the following March. Frank and I had renewed them both 2 months before he got sick, because we'd been planning to go to Portugal. We'd been planning it for 11 years, actually. Always something. His mother's hip, my sister's wedding, the recession, the kids needing this or needing that. Then he got sick, and then he was gone, and the passport sat in the drawer like a question nobody was answering. I opened my laptop. I looked up flights to Kyoto. There was one leaving Tuesday. 1 connection through Seattle, reasonable layover. Not cheap, but not impossible. I had savings. I had Frank's life insurance, which I barely touched in 4 years, because spending it felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. But the account was there, solid, quiet, waiting. I sat with the cursor hovering over the confirm button for about 4 minutes. Then I bought the ticket. I didn't tell anyone. I called my neighbor Phyllis and asked if she'd look after my own cat, a grey tabby named Biscuit who had the personality of a retired librarian. She said, of course, "What's the occasion?" I said just a little trip. She didn't press, which is one of the many reasons I love Phyllis. I packed light, 1 carry-on, 1 personal bag, comfortable walking shoes, the good ones with the arch support I bought last spring and never had occasion to wear. A silk scarf Frank had brought me from a work trip to Chicago years ago. My journal, empty since his funeral. A photograph of him in my coat pocket, the one from our 30th anniversary where he'd worn the blue shirt and looked at the camera like he was laughing at a joke, only the 2 of us knew. I did not water my daughter-in-law's orchids before I left. I did not arrange for the mail. I left a note for Phyllis about the cleaning service, just so she'd know, and I fed Biscuit twice before the taxi came. The airport felt enormous. It always had, but walking through it alone, with no one to coordinate with, no one's boarding pass to double-check, No one pulling a carry-on into the backs of my heels. It felt like a different kind of enormous. Open. Almost loud with possibility. The woman at the gate glanced at my passport, and then at me in that particular way. People glance at older women traveling alone, like they're trying to determine whether to feel concerned or impressed. I just smiled and walked through. I slept on the first flight. On the second, somewhere over the Pacific, I sat with the window shade up and watched the dark water below, and I thought about the last real trip Frank and I had taken together. It was 7 years ago, a road trip through Montana. We'd argued about directions the whole time and eaten at a diner where the pie was better than anything either of us had ever tasted, and on the last night we'd sat outside the motel watching the stars come out, and he'd said, quietly, we should do this more. We didn't. I landed in Osaka on a Wednesday morning, which was still Tuesday at home, which felt like a small gift from the universe. I took the train to Kyoto. It was clean and quiet, and moved through the countryside so smoothly it felt like gliding. I watched rice paddies and small towns slide by and thought, I am 69 years old and I am doing this alone, and it is fine. It is more than fine. My hotel was a small inn not far from the old city centre. Not expensive. Clean. The woman at the desk spoke careful English and handed me my key with both hands, which I later learned was customary, though it felt in the moment like being given something precious. The room was small and tidy, a window that opened onto a narrow courtyard where a maple tree was beginning to turn red at the edges. I sat on the edge of the bed, jet-lagged and slightly disoriented, and looked at that tree for a long time. Then I took out my journal and wrote the first thing I'd written since Frank died. I'm here. I don't know why exactly. I know why I left. I just don't know what I'm looking for yet. I left it at that for the day. The next morning I found a small cafe a few streets over. The kind of place with 6 tables and a handwritten menu and a woman in her 70s behind the counter who clearly ran everything herself. I ordered coffee and toast and ate slowly, watching the street, people on bicycles, a man in a suit walking fast, 2 elderly women in conversation, their heads tilted toward each other like flowers in a light wind. No one was paying attention to me. No one needed anything from me. It was the strangest feeling, not lonely, just quiet in a way I'd forgotten quiet could feel. I'd been sitting there maybe 40 minutes when the woman at the next table spoke to me. American, she said. I turned. She was about my age, maybe a year or 2 older. Silver hair cut short and practical, reading glasses on a beaded chain. She was eating soup with the focused concentration of someone who takes breakfast seriously. Yes, I said. Me too. She went back to her soup, then paused. You're alone? I am. Good for you, she said, not sarcastically, just matter of fact, like it was a statement of respect. Her name was Vivian. She'd been a high school art teacher for 32 years in Portland, Oregon. Widowed 6 years ago. She was traveling for the 2nd time since her husband passed, the first time having been to New Mexico, which she described as necessary and a little strange. Why Kyoto? I asked. My husband always wanted to come here. She said it plainly, the way you say a thing you've had to say many times and have finally made peace with. He never did, so I came for both of us. I understood that completely. I didn't explain why. She didn't ask. We walked together that afternoon, not with a plan, not with a map, just through the streets near the old neighborhood, following turns that looked interesting and stopping when something caught our attention. Vivian had a gift for noticing small things. A moss-covered wall, a cat asleep on a stone lantern, the particular color the light turned when it came through a paper screen. I painted for 30 years, she said, and I still can't explain why light does what it does. We had dinner at a place she'd found the day before, a counter with 8 seats where a man cooked ramen with the kind of seriousness that borders on ceremony. We ate without talking much. The soup was extraordinary. Well, Vivian said afterward, outside on the street. Same time tomorrow? Same time tomorrow, I said. That night my phone lit up. My son. I stared at the name on the screen. I didn't answer. He called twice more before midnight, then his wife. Then, just before 1 in the morning, a text. Mom, we tried your house. Phyllis said you took a trip. Where are you? Are you okay? I set the phone face down on the nightstand and went to sleep. In the morning, more messages. My son's voice in my head, even without listening to the voicemails, that particular tone he got when things deviated from his expectations. He was a good man, he genuinely was. But somewhere along the way he had learned to see me as a fixed point, something that stayed, something you could count on not to move. Vivian and I went to Arashiyama that day. The bamboo grove in the early morning before the crowds arrived, the tall green stalks filtering the light into something that didn't look entirely real. We walked without talking. Some places ask you to be quiet, and you listen. Afterward, we had tea at a small shop near the river. Matcha, thick and a little bitter, served in a bowl that felt old and deliberate in my hands. "Did you call them back?" Vivian asked. She'd seen my phone the night before when it kept lighting up across the table at dinner. "No," she nodded. "My kids called every day the first time I traveled alone after Gerald died, not because they were worried, because they didn't know what to do with a version of me that wasn't available. I thought about that for a while. Then, my son didn't invite me on this trip. I found out about it incidentally, because my grandson mentioned Tokyo at dinner, and nobody corrected him." Vivian put down her tea bowl. "Japan? They're here?" "Tokyo, yes. Different city. And you came anyway." "I came anyway." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said simply, "Good." We found a fabric shop on the walk back. Vivian went in to look, and I waited outside on a low stone step and called my granddaughter instead. Penny answered on the third ring. "Grandma?" "Hi, sweetheart." A pause, background noise, voices, what sounded like a busy street. "Wait, are you okay? Dad's been—" "I'm fine. I'm in Kyoto." Silence. Kyoto, her voice did something complicated. "Grandma? You're in Japan." "I am. The maple trees here are starting to turn. You'd love it." Another silence. Then, quieter. "Did you come because we didn't take you?" I thought about how to answer that. "I came because I should have come years ago." She didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear her breathing, and something in it shifted. "I'm sorry we didn't ask you. I told Mum it wasn't right." "Did you?" "She said you'd be more comfortable at home. I said I didn't think that was true." A pause. "I was right, wasn't I? You were right." She exhaled. "Dad doesn't know I'm talking to you. Is it okay if I keep texting you?" "More than okay," I said. "Tell me what you're eating." We talked for 20 minutes. She told me about the ramen place they'd found, about a vending machine that sold hot coffee, about a temple that had 10,000 lanterns, and how it had made even her father stop talking for a full minute. She sounded like herself, fully, in a way she sometimes didn't, when adults were nearby. Before she hung up, she said quietly, "Grandma, I'm glad you went." I held on to that. The call from my son came the next evening. I'd expected it earlier, so in a way the delay itself was information. I answered. "Mom." His voice was careful, feeling for solid ground. "Phyllis says you're in Japan." "I am." A long pause. "You're in Japan. Kyoto specifically. It's beautiful. Have you been to the old city center yet? You should go if you haven't." "Mom." He exhaled. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you didn't tell me," I said. "You've been planning this trip since April. Penny mentioned Tokyo at Easter dinner and you changed the subject. I figured it out. I just waited to see if you'd say something. Silence. I'm not angry, I continued, and I meant it. The anger, if it ever was anger, had settled into something quieter during the bamboo walk, something more like clarity. But I want you to understand something. I have watered your orchids. I have taken in your packages and attended your children's appointments and cancelled my own plans to be available when you needed someone reliable. And that's fine. I've done it gladly, mostly. But I'm not only that, David. I'm not just the reliable one who stays. My son's name wasn't on the list of names to avoid. I didn't use it. I'd slipped in my head the name was already David from the original story. Let me correct that. You have a whole life, my son said finally. His voice was different now, smaller somehow. I do. I'm living it right now. He didn't say much after that. We stayed on the line for another few minutes, neither of us quite sure how to end it. Before I hung up, I said, "Go see the old city if you have time. Take the kids somewhere they have to be quiet. It's good for all of you." He said he would. I didn't know if he believed me or himself. Vivian and I took the train to Nara the following day. The deer there wandered freely through the park, coming up to tourists with a bored confidence that reminded me of cats. We bought crackers to feed them, and were immediately surrounded by 5 of them and one very persistent buck who pressed his nose against Vivian's coat pocket. "He can smell the crackers," I said. "He can also apparently sense that I'm a pushover," she said, laughing. She laughed the way people laugh when they've forgotten for a moment that they're sad, which is the best kind of laughter there is. We sat on a bench near the great shrine afterward, the afternoon getting long and golden. Vivian had brought her small travel sketchbook and was drawing the outline of the lantern in front of us. I watched her hand move across the page with a sureness that comes from decades of practice, and I thought about what Frank used to say whenever I talked about things I'd wanted to do and hadn't. Well, there's still time. He'd said that until there wasn't. "What did you give up?" I asked Vivian. Not sure why. It just came out. She didn't look up from her sketch. "Teaching," she said. "The real kind. I spent the last 12 years before retirement doing testing prep because that's what the district wanted." "What did you give up?" I thought about it honestly. "Time," I said. "I gave up time. I kept thinking there would be more of it." She looked up then. "There is," she said. "That's the part they don't tell you. After a certain age, people assume you're winding down. But you're not. You're just starting to understand what actually matters." That evening I had a message from Penny, a photo she'd taken from a temple walkway, red leaves against grey stone, a shaft of late light across the path. No caption, just the image. I sent back a photo I'd taken that morning of the maple outside my inn window. She replied with a single word, "Twins." I smiled for a long time at that. The letter arrived folded into my hotel message box, which I found charming that the hotel still used message boxes, on my 5th day in Kyoto. My son must have found the hotel name from Phyllis somehow. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope before I recognized the reasoning behind it. I sat at the small desk in my room and opened it. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. I don't have a way to defend what we did. We told ourselves it was practical, that the trip was too demanding, that you'd be more comfortable, but that was us making a decision for you without asking you. That was wrong. I want you to know I know that. I don't expect this to fix anything. I just didn't want the Pacific Ocean to be between us without you knowing." He'd signed it with his name, and then below that, a second line, Penny showed me her photo, the one of the leaves. She said you two were talking every day. I'm glad. I folded the letter. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was punishing him, but because some things deserve to sit before you answer them, like bread that needs to rise. You can't hurry it. Vivian and I had planned to part ways that afternoon. She was heading to Hiroshima. I had no fixed plan. But over breakfast, she looked at me across the table and said, "Change your ticket. Come with me. I've never been. Neither have I. That's the point." So I went. Hiroshima was not what I expected, which is perhaps what everyone says who goes there without knowing what to expect. The city was alive. Ordinary in the best sense of the word. Coffee shops and bicycles and school children walking in lines, and then the Peace Memorial Park, which existed inside all that ordinary life, like a held breath, and we walked through it slowly, neither of us saying very much. At the A-bomb dome I stood for a long time. I thought of Frank, who had taught history for most of his career. He would have stood here differently than I did, with more context, more knowledge, but I stood here as myself. Just a woman of 69 who had lived through her own ordinary losses and understood, in a way that was new and incomplete and honest, that every life cut short is a world that doesn't get to finish. Vivian took a photo of me there, though I didn't realize she had until she showed me later. I was looking away from the camera, hands at my sides. She hadn't posed me, hadn't asked permission, just caught me as I was. "You look like someone trying to understand something true," she said. I said. My phone rang while we were eating dinner that night. "My daughter-in-law," I answered. "Helen." Her voice had a texture I hadn't heard from her before. Less smooth, more real. "I got your son to write you a letter, which took 4 days and 2 drafts and a fight that I am not going to describe to you. I just want to say my own piece, if that's all right." The name slipped again in my internal narration. I'll stay consistent. She was my daughter-in-law. I won't name her. "Go ahead," I said. "We were afraid of having you there." She said it quickly, like she needed to get through it before she lost the nerve. "Not because of your health or your mobility or anything like that, because you would have seen us, the way things are between us right now, my husband and I." A pause. "It's not good, we're trying. But we've been not good for a while, and we didn't want to witness, and that is not a fair reason to exclude you. I know that, I'm sorry." I sat with that for a moment. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. "I mean it, I know you do." I looked out the restaurant window at the street below. Hiroshima at night, warm and lit and alive. For what it's worth, I'm not coming home to report on either of you. I'm coming home to be your children's grandmother, and, if you'll let me, something more than the person who waters the orchids." She laughed at that. It was a surprised laugh, the kind you don't plan. "The orchids are fine," she said. Phyllis went over. Of course she did. We talked for another few minutes, not about anything important, about the food, about Penny's photos, about the way my grandson had apparently eaten an entire plate of takoyaki and announced it was better than pizza. Normal things. The building blocks of a relationship that might, with patience, become real. After I hung up, Vivian poured us each more tea. "Better?" she asked. "Different," I said. "I think different is the right word." She nodded. "Different is where you begin." We had 2 more days together. One in Hiroshima, one back in Kyoto for last walks and a final breakfast at the cafe where we'd first met. On the morning, we had to separate. She was flying to Seoul. I was heading home. We stood outside the inn with our bags, both of us slightly formal in the way you get when you're trying to hold something lightly enough that it doesn't break. "You'll come to Portland," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'll come to Portland," I agreed. She handed me a folded piece of paper. Her sketch of the lantern from Nora, with both of us on the bench in the background, our heads tilted slightly toward each other, her sketchbook in her lap. In the margin, in her teacher's handwriting, for the woman who remembered she was still here. I didn't say anything. I just hugged her, and she hugged back with the particular firmness of someone who knows the value of the thing. I flew home on a Thursday. Landed grey-skied, familiar. The air smelled like October and lawn clippings, and something faintly of diesel from the highway. My house was exactly as I'd left it. Biscuit was not exactly as I'd left him. He'd apparently decided in my absence that Phyllis's house was also acceptable, but he came home with me readily enough and resumed his spot on the arm of the couch with the dignity of someone who has not, technically, moved at all. I unpacked slowly, put the silk scarf on the hook by the door where I'd see it, opened the journal and sat at the kitchen table. Outside, the light was doing what fall light does in the late afternoon, long and particular, the way it leans rather than floods. I wrote, I'm home. I'm different. Both things are true, and neither one cancels the other. Penny came by the next evening. No warning, just a knock. And there she was in her oversized jacket with her hair down and a small wrapped package in her hand. We got back today, she said. I know. Come in. She sat at the kitchen table the way she had since she was small, feet tucked up under her, and watched me put the kettle on. She was 14, but sometimes she seemed ancient in the way certain young people do when they've been paying closer attention than anyone gave them credit for. I got you something, she said, pushing the package across the table. It was a small ceramic cat, white with one paw raised. Good luck, she said. That's what the woman at the shop said. Thank you, sweetheart. She looked at her hands for a moment. Dad was quiet the whole flight home, quieter than normal. Mom said he was tired, but I think he was thinking. Good, I said. Thinking is good. He read your letter, the one you sent him. I know he did. He didn't show me, but I saw him reading it more than once. She picked at the edge of the table. Do you think things will be different now? I poured the tea, set a mug in front of her, sat down. I don't know, I said honestly. I think it depends on whether people decide to see things they've been choosing not to see. That takes time. Sometimes it takes longer than you want it to. She nodded slowly. My friend's parents got divorced, she said, in a way that meant something else entirely. I know, I said, because I did. We sat with that for a moment. I'm applying to this art program, she said, changing the subject with the particular agility of teenagers, who can pivot through emotional terrain faster than anyone. It's in New York, 2 weeks in the summer. It's expensive, but apply, I said. She looked up. Just like that? Just like that. Apply. See what happens. Don't wait for permission from people who aren't you. She held my gaze for a moment, something working behind her eyes that I recognized because I had felt it myself recently, standing in a bamboo grove with the light coming through in columns. Okay, she said. Okay. My son came on Sunday, alone, which I hadn't expected. He stood at the door in the same kind of careful stillness as his letter, like he was trying to take up less space than usual. I made soup, I said. Come in. He came in. We ate at the kitchen table. It was good soup. Vegetable, Frank's old recipe. Nothing fancy. My son ate 2 bowls, which meant he was nervous because he always eats when he's nervous. I pretended not to notice. Partway through the meal, he said, I talked to her. I didn't ask who, and she told me what she told you. About why we didn't want you there. I set down my spoon. She was right, he said. It was selfish. We put our stuff on you without telling you what it actually was. We told ourselves a story about why it was better for you to stay, and it wasn't true. He looked at his soup. I've been telling myself stories about you for a while. That you were okay, that you didn't need. He stopped. Say it, I said. He looked up. That you didn't need to be included, because you never said anything. I know, I said. I should have said something. So should we, he said. We sat with that for a moment. Outside, the wind moved through the oak tree, the one Frank had planted when our son was born, now enormous and absolutely settled in the yard. I'm not the same as I was when I left, I said finally. I want you to know that. Not worse, just not the same. He nodded. Penny said, she's a perceptive kid. She gets it from you. He said it like he was surprised to be saying it, like the thought had arrived just ahead of the words. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying somewhere over the Pacific, quietly, in the dark, and it had served its purpose. What I felt now was simpler, like something had been set down that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. "Come for dinner next Sunday," I said. "Bring the kids, just the kids. You and I can talk more then." He nodded. "Okay, and tell your wife the orchids are fine." Phyllis went over. "She can stop worrying." He laughed. First time since he'd walked in. She wasn't worrying about the orchids. "I know," I said, "but it's a good place to start." After he left, I stood at the kitchen window for a while. The light was going. Biscuit was on the counter where he knew he wasn't allowed, watching me with the equanimity of someone who has decided the rules do not apply to him. I picked him up anyway and stood there holding him, looking out at Frank's oak tree. I thought about what Vivian had said that first morning in the cafe. Good for you. 2 words. No drama, no explanation required. Just good for you. I thought about the bamboo grove, the deer in Nara, the paper lantern and the held breath of a city that had learned to live alongside its own history. I thought about Hiroshima at night, and the ramen, and the fabric shop, and the maple tree outside my inn window that was just beginning, at its edges, to remember what it was. I thought about Penny's face when she'd said, "I'm glad you went." I thought about standing in the security line at the airport, alone, boarding pass in hand, and the particular feeling of moving forward without asking anyone's permission. I took out my journal that night and wrote one last page. Not for anyone. Just for the record. Things I'm done apologizing for, taking up space, having preferences, wanting to go places I've never been, saying no to the list, saying yes to myself, buying the ticket. Frank always said, "There's still time." He was right. There is. I just stopped waiting for someone else to use it for me. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in a dramatic way, not the way people talk about it when they want to sound wise, just in the plain, practical way you think about things when you've had enough time to watch them play out. My son and his wife made a choice. They decided without asking me that I was better suited to stay behind, that I was someone whose presence needed to be managed rather than welcomed, and they told themselves a story about it, that it was considerate, that it was practical, that it was for my own good. People are remarkably good at building comfortable explanations for the things they do when they don't want to look too closely at their reasons. But here is the thing about cause and effect. It doesn't care about your explanations. It only cares about what you actually did. They chose to leave me out, and because they did, I chose to go. And because I went, I stood in the bamboo grove in Arashiyama and felt something loosen in me that had been pulled tight for years. I met Vivian over coffee and bad tourist maps, and a deer that would not leave her coat pocket alone. I walked through Hiroshima and understood something about loss that I couldn't have understood from a living room. I called my granddaughter Penny from a stone step outside a fabric shop and heard her say quietly, "I told Mom it wasn't right," and knew that this girl, 14 years old, had been paying more attention than any of us realized. None of that happens if they bring me along and treat me like luggage they're obligated to carry. That's the part that's hard to explain to people. Sometimes the thing that looks like a wound is actually the door opening. I don't think wisdom comes from suffering, exactly. That's too neat, too convenient. Plenty of people suffer and learn nothing from it, and plenty of people learn everything they need to from a Tuesday afternoon that goes unexpectedly right. What I think is that wisdom comes from paying attention, from choosing, when something hard happens, to stay curious about it rather than just wounded by it. I could have sat in my house for 2 weeks, tending orchids and building resentment like a second mortgage. Instead, I paid attention to what I actually wanted, maybe for the first time in a long time, and I went after it. That's the intelligence part. Not book intelligence, the kind that knows the difference between what you're supposed to want and what you actually need. And the courage, because that's what it was, even if it didn't feel grand at the time. The courage wasn't in buying the ticket, it was in not calling anyone first, not asking permission, not softening it by framing it as something else. I went because I wanted to go, and I didn't apologize for it, and that small, quiet refusal to shrink was the bravest thing I'd done in longer than I could remember. Penny understood that instinctively. She's going to be fine, that girl. She's already asking the right questions. My son is learning. My daughter-in-law said something true and uncomfortable and offered it without decoration, which took more integrity than most people manage. That matters. I haven't forgotten it. And Vivian handed me a sketch of the two of us on a bench in Nora and wrote in the margin, "For the woman who remembered she was still here." I have it on my dresser now, next to Frank's photo. I was still here. I just needed to go somewhere to remember it. What I know now, sitting at this kitchen table with biscuit on the counter where he isn't supposed to be, and the oak tree going gold outside the window, is that nobody gives you back the time you spend waiting for inclusion that was never coming. You have to take your own life back with both hands, quietly, without drama, one book ticket at a time. Frank always said there's still time. I finally left him.